new discovery about Cygnus, the constellation Cygnus, and it relates directly to our own spiritual quests and the level of vibration or of spiritual energy that we can achieve. There is, in William, I think Henry does a beautiful job of interviewing. It's one of the most exciting interviews I've ever heard. Plus, Andrew is talking to me in the subscriber section, and in addition, there is a Dreamland special event. It's the 5th item in the list on this media player. You can listen to it free. It is my own Cygnus meditation, and it relates to experiences I've been having most of my life, out-of-the-body experiences, and some work of Robert Monroe. Don't miss it. And also, if you want to become a subscriber to Unknown Country, now is the time, because we have 6 copies of the Cygnus Mystery available to the first 6 people who order a 1-year or longer subscription of any kind by clicking on the subscribe tab on unknowncountry.com. So now's the time. Let me turn this over now to one of the most incredible Dreamland interviews you will ever have heard, William Henry and Andrew Collins on the Cygnus Mystery.
From Nashville, this is William Henry filling in for Whitley Strieber. This is Dreamland. Welcome, everyone. I'd like you to stop what you're doing for a moment. If you're driving, pull over. Close the curtain on everyday reality and open a passage to the cave of treasure deep inside your mind. Take a deep breath and look around you. Look towards the north on the wall. You see a pillar topped by a swan, a bird of light shining upon you. Climb aboard its back. Take another deep breath. And notice that the walls begin to buzz, to flux and move liquid-like. Suddenly, from the celestial swan, you see a blue-white flash of light. Then another. And another. What are they? The Holy Goose, the Holy Ghost, the Holy Ghost. The Holy Spirit is dropping new life into your being, baptizing you in a shower of cosmic particles that transform your being. You emerge from the cave renewed, exhilarated, with your cells regenerated, a living manifestation of light itself. Today's guest, Andrew Collins, has been on an incredible 30-year quest that has led him to the secrets of these cosmic particles and their influence on human evolution. All around the world, he found ancient peoples fixed the location of heaven, the source of cosmic life and death, in the same segment of sky, the constellation of Cygnus, the swan. Cygnus was once seen as the entrance and exit to the sky world, making it a candidate for the original location of heaven, the God star, which before the rise of Christianity was often seen as existing in the extreme north and accessed via the pole star. As Andrew unraveled the earliest beliefs of most distant ancestors, he discovered they knew what cutting-edge astrophysics is now telling us. Those blue-white flashes may in fact be an exotic subatomic particle spit from Cygnus the swan that scientists call a cygnet. Some believe these are the same as the God particle, the unseen force behind the building blocks of nature sought by scientists at the particle accelerator at CERN near Geneva. As we have talked many times, the Mayans described a cosmic sap coming out of the Great Rift in the Milky Way in 2012. When I consulted Google on this sap, I found that SAP, S-A-P, may be an acronym for subatomic particle. Are we on the verge of discovering the deepest secrets of the universe that will ultimately transform us into higher beings? Here to talk about the impact of cosmic ray showers from the Great Swan in ancient times and those occurring in our time is Andrew Collins. Andrew, welcome to Dreamland.
Hi, William. How are you?
Tremendous. This is such exciting stuff. You know, I've been a big fan of yours since From the Ashes of Angels and the Gods of Eden, but I think now this is probably your most important work, and it points to this idea that we're truly waking up into an incredible cosmic reality. Tell us about cosmic rays and how they might have influenced human evolution.
Well, Carl Sagan said as early as 1972 that human evolution was influenced by subatomic particles, cosmic rays, inbound from what he described as a neutron star. Now, that's a collapsed star, very similar to a black hole in deep space. And he said this in a book called The Dragons of Eden and in The Cosmic Connection. And this seemed to have passed by the scientists of the time, even though obviously he must have had very good reasons for saying this. And my own journey, which, as you say, has taken up to 30 years to reach this point, has quite independently concluded that cosmic rays may well be an important factor in not just the evolution of humankind, but our connection with cosmic consciousness, our relationship with the universe as a whole. And I believe that this goes back probably tens of thousands of years to the very first cave artists of Western Europe and, of course, in other parts of the world, when they would seem to have spent great amounts of time deep underground in caves that were as much as a mile deep, communing with the cosmos and achieving great leaps in intelligence and intellect and understanding, and paving way for what we obviously know as the rise of civilization. And what's so interesting is that deep underground, in theory, no form of external radiation is able to penetrate, which is why these deep underground facilities are often constructed so deep down in mines or within tunnels, within mountains and whatever. And yet we do know that there are two types of cosmic rays that penetrate that deeply, one of which are neutrinos, and neutrinos pass through the Earth virtually without affecting anything, and that includes, us carbon-based life forms. But there is one other type of particle that was repeatedly registered when these particle facilities were first opened in the early 1980s, and they were coming with a rhythmic pulse of exactly 4.8 hours, and this easily was able to pin down where they were coming from, and that was either a neutron star or a black hole. They're not sure exactly what. Actually, in the Cygnus constellation, from a source called Cygnus X-1. And since that time, in the 1980s, particle physicists, astrophysicists have been tracking this particular stellar body and have found right the way through to recent releases only within the past few months that there is a huge excess of cosmic rays coming towards the Earth from that direction. And what's so important is that when they looked at Cygnus X-1, the source, they found that it was spewing out these huge, long particle beams of energy directed at the Earth itself. It was like some unimaginable cosmic gun barrel pointing its way towards the Earth. And that is unique because Cygnus X-1 is actually inside our own galaxy. In astronomical terms, it's extremely close. It's around 30,000 light years away, which obviously sounds a long way away, but it's actually quite close. So is it possible that Cygnus X-1 is in some way affecting human evolution down on the Earth? My researches have shown that all the way around the world there are prehistoric and sacred sites that seem to be orientated or designed to reflect the influence of the star Cygnus quite particularly. And when I say all around the world, we're talking about everywhere from the pyramids at Giza to various Native American mounds in Ohio and Georgia and other places, through to temples in India, Hindu temples in India, to Avebury in southeast England, to Newgrange Passage Grave in Ireland, to the very oldest stone temple that's just been discovered in southeast Turkey at a place called Göbekli Tepe, which I visited in 2004. All of these places are aligned towards Cygnus the Swan, and it is also found depicted in bird form in the walls of some of the earliest Paleolithic caves in southeast France. Now, all of this is coming to light now, and something big is happening. And as we go on, I'll also try and explain how this is so important to 2012.
Excellent. But let's take a moment to just go back to the beginning of this. And how was it, Andrew, that Paleolithic man came upon this knowledge? Did he imbibe in sacred substances, as so many traditions infer? What was the spark that started humankind looking towards Cygnus, the great swan, as this source of tremendous cosmic energy?
I think that it was probably begun when they would spend extremely long periods of time deep underground, communing with, let's assume, the universe, with Mother Earth or whatever. And for this, there would have been a huge sensory deprivation, obviously intense long periods of darkness. This in itself would be enough to induce trances. But if you then enhance this with the use of psychotropic, hallucinogenic substances, of which we know and are pretty certain that Paleolithic man was using, then it allows a sense of communion with that which is beyond earthly understanding, cosmic consciousness, if you like. And this in itself would have at least opened them up to whatever might have been going on deep underground on a very, very subtle level. But it is a fact that you can actually witness for yourself cosmic rays. And this was first determined by the Apollo astronauts in the 1960s, when they found that as they tried to go off to sleep, they would see flashes of white or bluey-white light in front of their eyes. And this was when their eyes were either open or with their eyes closed. And subsequent research that was done by NASA, working with the Apollo astronauts that came after, showed quite conclusively that what was happening is that cosmic rays were passing through the eyes, the liquid part of the eye, and creating an effect known as Cherenkov radiation. And essentially this is an emission, a burst of what we would perceive as light. And this can seem as an objective experience, as the astronauts saw for themselves. Now, obviously here on Earth, we have light during the day, we have artificial light at night, and we are not aware of this. Plus, our own atmosphere blocks out 99% of cosmic rays that come through towards ground level. And so we're not really aware of this. But it is a fact that if you spend long enough time in a completely darkened room, you will begin to see flashes of light. People have interpreted these in the past as paranormal experiences. And in many ways they are, because they are little understood. But there is an extremely good chance that what people are experiencing when they see flashes of light before the eyes is cosmic rays that are actually passing through the eyes. Now, if you then transfer this situation to deep underground, maybe a mile, up to a mile underground, and you're sitting in intense darkness, and suddenly you see flashes of light, and these flashes of light have a rhythmic pulse. That, you know, they rise and fall over the hours and across days. It wouldn't take very long before you started to realise that they were at their most intensified when the constellation of Cygnus was above, because only its cosmic rays penetrate so deep down underground and can be registered by scientific instrumentation, and thus by our own eyes as well. In other words, they would have found themselves at one with the cycle of Cygnus X-1. You know, this may have taken generations, of course, but eventually they would have realised that there was an association with the Cygnus constellation and be drawn to it. And obviously, I think what we need to go on now is to try and understand how they perceived Cygnus in their own mythological and religious terms.
Andrew, let's take a break, and when we come back, let's explore that very question. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Andrew Collins, whose website is andrewcollins.com. Andrew, just before the break, you had brought up that incredible story about the Apollo astronauts, and literally NASA had to redesign the helmets for the astronauts to deflect the cosmic rays because they kept perceiving what they described as phosphenes, curlicue symbols, hash marks, squares, circles, a basic geometric code. And what was interesting about that is that those were the same symbols that were being seen by Tim Leary and his gang at Harvard, who were tripping on acid at the very same time. And these symbols, these same phosphenes, turn up in rock art going back thousands upon thousands of years. And what people started to speculate, including me in my book, The Healing Sun Code, is that perhaps these cosmic rays trigger latent knowledge or latent capabilities within our DNA. So I called this symbol system the Healing Sun Code, suggesting that if we can tune into these cosmic vibrations, these intermittent cycles as you're describing from Cygnus or elsewhere, it's possible that it can help us ignite what you or others might describe as data or knowledge latent within our junk DNA. Let's talk about that for just a moment, this possibility that these cosmic rays stimulated human evolution spontaneously, even in an extraordinary way.
Okay. Now, we talk about junk DNA. 97% of the DNA in our body is considered to be junk, i.e., it does not self-replicate or does not allow replication within the biological form. And it is very little understood. And yet, some brand new evidence is suggesting that it may well encode data, information that has been inside us, within us, for not hundreds of thousands of years, but possibly millions and millions, maybe even billions of years. And that it could actually encode something from a time before we were even on Earth itself. I'm sure most of the listeners are aware of the whole concept of panspermia, the idea that DNA and life itself may have come to the Earth from elsewhere, possibly hitching a ride on a comet, a meteor, an asteroid, or whatever. Or we pass through clouds of gaseous matter, which has the fundamental building blocks of life within them, and this triggers this off. Now, if this is the case, then it is very possible that that contained within our junk DNA are quite simply what you'd refer to as alien messages. In other words, information, coded data, which is in some way triggered off, almost certainly, by cosmic rays at certain times, which would update our evolutionary processes, presumably on quite a subtle level, but obviously at some points in the past, this would have led to very great changes in the path of humanity, including quite obviously the very first cave artists. This was a time around 35 to 40,000 years ago, when we know that there were massive increases of cosmic rays entering into the Earth's atmosphere. This is recorded in ice core samples found at Antarctica and in the Arctic region. The levels of that show quite clearly, double, if not 3 times the amount of cosmic rays reaching the Earth at these times. And this was a time of great change. This was the beginnings of, the human intellect that we know today, the beginnings of religion, obviously the beginnings of art, the beginning of other religious processes, including an understanding of the concept of death and the afterlife. You know, we start finding quite complex burials taking place, coincident to the very first cave artists in southern France. But there was another period around 15 to 17,000 years ago when there was another huge increase in cosmic rays. And this was the scene that was set time-wise for the very foundations of civilization, which began really, in the ancient world at least, in southeast Turkey, the Near East, the old biblical land of Eden, at this place called Göbekli Tepe, the oldest temple in the world, which, as I said, I visited in 2004, and it's one of the most marvellous places I've ever been to in my life. It's a very extraordinary place, totally aligned to the stars of Cygnus during a period of around 11,000 years ago. This is the oldest stone temple anywhere in the world, and somehow this idea of the importance of Cygnus was being preserved through from the Paleolithic era into the very beginnings of what we call the Neolithic era. You know, the very first agriculturists, the first metal workers, those who first settled and tilled the land.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, I want to, just for a moment, let's go back to this idea of the alien messages in our junk DNA idea. I know you're a major researcher and proponent of the whole idea of the influence of the Anunnaki and Nephilim on human evolution and human history. And when you're talking about a possibly, I mean, you have to wonder, is this an artificially controlled situation here? In other words, is this blazer, Cygnus X-1, pointing directly at us by chance, or was it engineered to be that way? I mean, people like Dr. Paul Laviolette have said there's an incredible extraterrestrial intelligence that has set up perhaps a system of pulsars throughout the galaxy for navigational purposes. Why couldn't they also use a system of blazers and pointing this cosmic energy directly at us to influence human evolution? My question is, with all of this talk about the Anunnaki and their influence in human evolution and Sitchin's proposal that the Anunnaki were responsible for retooling our DNA, is it possible that what we're talking about here are not humanoid-type figures, but rather cosmic energies that we then humanized?
Absolutely. That I would say you've hit it on the nail, as we would say in England. Is that, I mean, firstly, Cygnus X-1 is also a pulsar. Let's make that clear. I mean, they don't know exactly what it is. It's either a black hole or a neutron star. It's a binary star. And it's you know, that there is evidence to suggest that it is a pulsar as well. I am very much aware of Paul Laviollette's theories relating to an extraterrestrial intelligence at work with the pulsar system that we have in this galaxy and elsewhere. And I would say that, yes, we are dealing with some kind of ultra-terrestrial intelligence here. However, I would see it as something which is very natural to the galaxy itself. Maybe its purpose and role is to subtly evolve species of all kinds, you know, within the galaxy itself. You know, any that get in the way, if you like, of its being, in some way are accelerated in their development, in their evolution. And that those who wake up, become aware of the source and somehow, in some way, recognize this as almost like the origin point of life, i.e. the development of life, and also that they see it in terms of the place where we will return to in death, the place where our consciousness will return and become at one, you know, with the universe. Now, this is a strong possibility, which what it also suggests is that we should be looking for other planets along the line of life, as I call it, from Cygnus X-1 to here, maybe beyond the Earth, along the same line, or even closer towards Cygnus from here. And therefore, perhaps we should be looking for signs of life in the actual Cygnus region, places that may have been affected, by these cosmic rays, but because they were much closer to the source, they have evolved much quicker, accelerated their evolution much, much faster than us on Earth here. So, as I said, I think that SETI maybe should be setting their radio telescopes in the direction of Cygnus looking for signs of life. It would be a very fruitful area to do so, I believe.
It makes perfect sense. Absolutely. When we're looking at this extraterrestrial question, and let's just take another slant on that whole idea, how do you believe or figure UFOs fit into the picture?
Well, okay. Now, my ideas of UFOs might be slightly different to some listeners. I mean, I see them as intelligent energies in their own right. I wrote a whole book called Alien Energy on this particular theme. That they can virtually mould themselves into temporarily physical matter and appear for experiences and abductions and things like this. But that they themselves are almost intelligent energy. Energy, I believe, at its most purest state is intelligent. Like cosmic rays themselves, they are the highest energies known in the universe. So why should not they be intelligent in their own right? I believe that they are. But I believe that sometimes these very high energies can be held, contained within a cell-like structure, like a ball, like a balloon, like a bubble or whatever, and that this in some way creates some kind of unique process that I believe that we can see in terms of UFOs, Earth-like, flying saucers or whatever. That's not saying that, all UFOs are energy. Some may well be, physical nuts and bolts spacecraft. But I'm saying that, I believe that there do exist, these balls of pure energy that have intelligence, and they, in some way, are held together by, the magnetic fields, which themselves contain these high energies, which are themselves cosmic energies. And I think that they are partly responsible for a large number of the experiences that people have, close encounters, abductions, and things like this. And of course, what happens when this actually takes place? People start to evolve, they start to change, their whole life alter. I mean, I investigated the first ever UFO abduction reported in Britain. It occurred in 1974. I investigated it in 1977, 1978. And a whole family was abducted and had a 3-hour missing time. These people became my friends. I'm still in contact with them now, and something major happened to them. They changed from just your normal average family into incredible, intelligent artists of a psychic nature with an incredible awareness of the subtleties of life, of energies, of auras. These people changed virtually overnight, and this unquestionably was the result of their interaction with what you might call cosmic rays, in the form of this, light, which they entered into, and then suddenly, 3 hours later, they were, a mile further down the road. We need to try and understand the UFO phenomena in its relationship with cosmic rays. I know that my colleague, Greg Little, has talked on your very show here about, the relationship between cosmic rays being the highest energies in the universe and their relationships with UFOs. And I think that this is something that we should be looking more into now.
And Andrew, I'd like to talk about that just a little bit more when we get back from the break. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Andrew Collins. Andrew, in the Theosophical tradition, they speak of the 7 cosmic rays, and as each ray is mastered, the initiate becomes clothed in the energy of the ray until finally they're what's called an illumined one or a shining one. And the mastery of these 7 rays is also described in the Gnostic text, where it's referred to as the putting on of a spiritual garment, a robe of glory, a light body, which is really a veil or a sheath or covering that may be something similar to the UFO composed of light or cosmic rays you were describing a moment ago. Would you relate all of this to the Jewish mystical idea of the Merkabah? And are these cosmic rays then triggering this latent ability within each of us to transform into beings of light?
I think that the Jewish concept of the Merkabah is a perfect example of trying to show the manner that cosmic rays affect us. And I think that religions around the world have had their own idea of how they convey this information in religious terms. I mean, for a moment, if we can look at just the Hindu and Buddhist concepts to do with, cosmic consciousness, this is very much enveloped in the whole idea of Brahma being, not just the creator of the universe, but he rode on the swan goose, Hamsa, who is a form of Cygnus in Hindu and Vedic astronomy. And he was said to have only been able to make the creation of the universe by hearing the divine sound that Hamsa the swan goose created, and that this sound that the swan or goose made holds together the universe, and it can be heard, by mystics and shamans, initiates, whilst they're in a deep state. They attune and become at once with this. And I'm positive that what we are looking at here is another example of becoming aware of the way these cosmic rays, in this instance, certainly being connected again with Cygnus, are able, to affect us, to enlighten us, to initiate us, to be able to, carry us on to the next stage of evolution.
And that's what's so incredibly wild and important about your research here, is because it's going away from the realm of speculation and conjecture. You're getting a lot of scientific help on this, aren't you?
I am indeed, and I've actually been working with some ex-NASA astrophysicists that also belong to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory that have been working very, very closely on this idea that cosmic rays have been affecting human evolution for up to 40,000 years. And this is becoming a mainstream idea now. This is a mainstream science. The fact that obviously there are different factors that may have made us the way we are today. Everything from diet to climate to survival of the fittest. All of these are known to affect human evolution, but there is an X factor, one which is only now becoming apparent. And our friend Carl Sagan, the astronomer and the science writer, I think that he was onto this, as I say, as early as 1972. And I do not think it is coincidence that he was he liked a little bit of cannabis and was well known to smoke, basically. And I am pretty certain that certain forms of drugs do open certain doors of perception, as Aldous Huxley described many years ago, and allow us to see our interaction with the cosmos in a way which is much more pure and realistic than the one that we are told and given by, the orthodox science, whatever. And, the guy was obviously an inspired man, and I believe that he was totally right.
Yeah, I mean, Carl Sagan was very upfront saying, I wrote my most important works while under the influence of marijuana. He's one of the celebrity stoners, as they call them. And another person that was clearly tuned into this as well and is influencing pop culture is Arthur C. Clarke. I mean, you think that the Black Stone that appeared in 2001 is also...
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of the Black Stone at the very beginning of 2001, A Space Odyssey, is something that has fascinated me ever since I first saw that film. And I think that monolith, that black monolith, if you can see that in terms of cosmic rays and the way that the black monolith allowed, the ape men to become aware of the idea that if they picked up a bone and used that as a weapon, then they could win back their waterhole, which had just been lost to them by a stronger group. Then here we have a perfect example of the way that cosmic rays affected certain people in the past and it gave them the advantage in life. And it may well be that they pushed forward, accelerated more quickly than other neighbours in other parts of the world, maybe even other parts of their own region, to create this survival of the fittest situation. I mean, Arthur C. Clarke, I don't know where he got that idea from. I'm sure some of your listeners may ring in and tell us. But I think that he was also very much aware of the whole concept of cosmic rays and the way they affected human evolution.
And they've linked the concept of the cosmic ray with the Stargate and the possibility that we can travel through light years time as if there's nothing in between. Talk about the link between cosmic rays and stargates.
Well, I mean, we're talking about black holes here. Black holes are producing these cosmic rays almost as a byproduct, actually. I mean, basically, they are drawing in, mass energy, generally from other binary stars that are in close proximity to them, or those which they have encountered, come across on their travels, as it were. And they generate so much energy that they cannot gulp it down fast enough. And what happens is that they build up as like these almost like rings or discs of energy around them. And, they are almost burnt out at a certain point as these particle beams that shoot through vast vistas of space at almost the speed of light, so that they're able to, cover incredible distances in what, for them, is an extremely short period of time. I mean, if something is travelling at virtually the speed of light coming from Cygnus X-1, then although it might be 30,000 years for us, for it, those particles will only have been travelling, let's say, 15 minutes, something like that. So this is the way that these incredible energies are able to reach to almost like the opposite ends of the universe. But as I said, the importance about Cygnus X-1 and needs to be stressed is that it's inside our galaxy. There is no other blazer inside our own galaxy. And what a blazer means, let's make this clear to the listeners, is it's an astrophysical term for when one of these stellar objects, either, as I say, a black hole or a neutron star, actually is pointing its axis towards the Earth, so that we are looking at its beam like some kind of as I said, like looking down an incredible cosmic gun barrel, basically. And it's for this reason why the Earth is being showered with so many cosmic rays coming from that direction. And as I said, this is not something which is a New Age speculation. I've read very serious articles on this very subject only within the last few months, even since the publication of the Cygnus Mystery, which came out now in November. The very day that it was actually published, there was an important article in New Scientist magazine in Britain about this huge influx of cosmic rays coming from this precise point in Plus, I think it's also important to point out to the listeners that Cygnus X-3 is active now and is getting more so. It had a huge burst of activity in 2001. Then it went relatively quiet, but in November 2006, I say roughly when the Cygnus Mystery was published, right the way through till at least the end of January, into February 2007, it has been spewing out huge amounts of energy in our direction again. And this is being carefully monitored by telescopes and satellites all around the world, and and obviously up in the Earth's atmosphere to try and better understand what's happening on multiple frequencies, because it doesn't just send out these high energy cosmic rays. It sends out energies on other levels as well, X-rays, on gamma rays, radio waves, infrared. All of these different frequencies are monitored down here on Earth relating to Cygnus X-3.
Andrew, ever since I published the Healing Sun Code, and I guess that must have been 5 years ago or more, I'll be out lecturing, and I'll have, usually it's women in the audience that will come up to me and say, well, gosh, I'm seeing these symbols that I've never seen before, and I'm starting to paint them, or I'm drawing them, I'm documenting what I'm seeing in a journal. Have you come across examples in pop culture or in your travels of people that you could perhaps definitively say are being influenced by the cosmic rays from Cygnus?
Absolutely. And the main symbol that keeps cropping up is what we call the bird's foot symbol. It's like a three-pronged fork, so a very abstract, simple form of the bird's foot that people have continually contacted me and said, I kept seeing this symbol. It kept coming into my mind. I felt that it was something extraterrestrial. I felt that it was something to do with the cosmos. And what we know is that Cygnus, right the way out throughout the world, has been seen in terms as a bird in religious and mythological traditions. But it was also known, particularly in amongst the Native American peoples, as the bird's foot or the turkey's foot constellation. And they would represent it both in pictorial form and even draw the actual bird's foot upon the forehead, the place of the third eye, to represent the energies, the powers, coming from the Cygnus constellation, which I should point out also sits at the very northerly point of the Milky Way. The Milky Way is seen as the road or river to the sky world in shamanic and indigenous traditions all the way around the world. So the Milky Way was seen as a method of access to the sky world, which was seen as a portal, into virtually other universes, other realms of light, where beings of light exist.
Andrew, speaking of portals, we have to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to come back and talk about that portal that sits there on the Giza Plateau. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Andrew Collins. Andrew, what is the relationship between the Egyptian pyramids and Cygnus?
Well, this is actually the most controversial of the entire content of the Cygnus Mystery. And I suppose in some ways I should have expected it. But my own research has shown that the three, what we call wing stars of Cygnus, those are its crossbar, because for those listeners who are not aware of Cygnus per se, it is actually also known as the Northern Cross. It's a very prominent constellation, sits up there in the sky during the summer months, during the mid to late evening. And the crossbar of it, which we call the wing stars, fit perfectly to the three pyramids at Giza. This was our first observation. And subsequent work showed that the entire unified plan, the grand design of the Giza Plateau, seems to be focused around the rising and the setting of the stars of Cygnus. And of course, this is contrary to the belief of Robert Bouval and other supporters of the Orion correlation theory, the OCT, that believes obviously that Orion was the primary constellation associated with the Giza complex. And on the Graham Hancock message board over the last 5 months, there have been furious hundreds of posts, I mean literally several hundred or more posts, to and fro relating to whether Cygnus or Orion is the key constellation associated with Giza. And at this very moment in time, I am locked into online arguments with Robert Bouval over whether Orion or Sirius, Orion or Cygnus is more important there. And the reason why we see Cygnus is so important is that it pinpoints very, very accurately another key important site, almost what you would call the fourth pyramid on the Giza Plateau. And that is a prominent rocky knoll that has so far been overlooked in research, which is a half a mile exactly south of the Sphinx. And this place, which is known as Jebel Gibli, which means the southern hill, but it's also known as El Hudba, which means the high place, the holy place, basically, seems to have been the focus for the construction, all the trigonometry for the Giza pyramids. And this place marks a prominent star in Cygnus known as Alberio, which means the mouth or the hole or the beak, basically. And this relates to ancient Egyptian texts that speak about the entrance to an underground realm known as the underworld of the soul, or the Hall of Records, as the followers of Edgar Casey would describe it, which is said to be entranced via something called the Place of the World. Now, we believe that we have now located that well right at the base of Jebel Gibli, this fourth pyramid, if you like. And this is such an exciting discovery that the whole Edgar Casey Foundation, the ARE people, are now so anxious to try and see if we can explore this location more fully to find out what's actually there. And the more and more we find out about Jebel Gibli, the more we realise that it was the key to understanding the Giza complex. Now, some of this is in the Cygnus mystery, but I shall be writing a brand new book all about the search, and the discovery of the Hall of Records next. That's my next intent, working from the basis that we created in the Cygnus mystery and moving on to the next stage.
I mean, that's incredible, Andrew, because what you have in this book are really, it's not just one discovery. As you said, it's actually two, because you've actually been able to go into the ancient Edfu building texts and line them up through your Cygnus research and something that nobody else has ever done. And you're right, Absolutely. It is directly challenging the mainstream opinion about the Giza Plateau. But in your case, you have a heck of a lot more evidence, it seems, to back up your theory than what has previously been proposed. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously there's been a lot of research work on the Giza Plateau looking for underground chambers and cavities and whatever. And to be honest, there are a lot of natural cavities underneath the bedrock at Giza. This is something that I think most people will now accept. It's certainly something that Zoe Hawass and Mark Lerner, working at Giza, now accept. However, somewhere there is an entrance to an underground complex at Giza, and I believe that we are now very close to understanding what that is and what might lie beneath it. And the key is the Cygnus constellation.
Okay, so what lies beneath it? Are you going to tell us a little bit of a hint now, or do we have to wait for your next book?
Well, I think in many ways, this is the hint, and the fact is that that this is go back to Giza to double-check all of our coordinates, all of the measurements, to make sure we're right. And now I've got to go back for a third time in September, with even more, professional surveying equipment, because, if this is such a big discovery, then we've got to get this right. So over the next several months, we'll be refining it to the point that we can say that we've definitively found the entrance to the Hall of Records.
Now, you're going to be at the ARE giving a presentation. Is it in September or October?
It's in October, the 4th to the 7th of October. I shall be the keynote speaker at the ARE's Ancient Mysteries conference. So that's there at Virginia Beach if people are interested in coming along and saying hello.
Excellent, Andrew. I just can't say enough about the importance of as we've deduced here, the two major discoveries that are in this book, because what it's going to do is elevate our global conversation to an incredible level. And I, for one, just can't wait to see once we start seeing even more manifestations of this beam. I mean, you've described it as the barrel of a gun, but perhaps we might want to soften that a bit and think of the great swan as the great mother goose laying the golden egg, and that it's not really a gun barrel so much as it is a magic wand that potentially could be waved upon this entire planet and suddenly and spontaneously bring about a blossoming or awakening. What are your thoughts on that possibility, Andrew?
I sympathise completely with the terminology here, but I think what's important to remember is that these beams are the most deadly things in the entire universe. Anything that gets in their way is absolutely destroyed. The only reason why we ourselves down here are benefiting from it, as opposed to having any considerable negative influence, is that in some ways we are so far away from it that the beams have now just become a slight rain, a slight shower of cosmic rays. It's at such a level that we down here on Earth can handle it. If it was any stronger, it would destroy the Earth.
But now, as we move towards our galactic alignment in 2012, what are your thoughts about the prospects?
This is so important to the Cygnus. I mean, there has been a lot of talk about the galactic alignment of 2012, 21st of December 2012. As I'm sure most of your listeners will know, the sun will rise at the exact point where visually it will be in front of a galactic center, and it's and the Maya talk in terms of a new sun being born on that day. Well, what the Maya and other Mesoamerican civilizations talked about in terms of the rebirth of the sun was they saw it in terms of the sun egg, the egg that would be created by some kind of cosmic bird. The Maya called it Seven Macaw, and it was seen to be on the top of the cosmic tree, seen as the Milky Way. Well, Seven Macaw I can identify with Cygnus, and there is a move towards this now within Mayan astronomy. But what's more important is that sun egg, if you like, is seen by the proponents of 2012 as coming down this rift, this dark rift in the center of the Milky Way called the Great Rift, or the Dark Rift. And what none of them seem to recognize the significance of is that Great Rift starts at Cygnus, and that is the womb or the vulva of the cosmic mother, recognized as such, I believe, since Paleolithic times, and that this is basically where the new sun will come from the very womb of Cygnus itself.
Wow. So all we can do is get ready and start equipping ourselves with all of this incredible knowledge, and we're in a sense going to want to attune to these cosmic rays, but at the same time we're going to have to be very cautious about a high energy burst coming from the cosmos that brings who knows what. Andrew,
I think that'd be good.
Okay, good. Well, elaborate on that if you wouldn't. We wouldn't mind. We just got a couple moments left here. How is it going to be good for us? What can we do as individuals to ensure that it's good for us?
I think look after our children. I mean, they are being born at the moment. We've all heard the concept of the indigo children, star children that are being born with old souls, with great knowledge and intelligence. You know, the people that are the product, I believe, of any cosmic rays that have been affecting us over, let's say, the last 20, 30 years, and that we should, you know, be aware that now being born into our midst are children with, you know, an incredible new insight into cosmic consciousness, and it's them that we should be teaching about all of these ideas, because obviously, you know, the key nexus point, the eschaton point, is 2012. So we need everybody to be aware of just how important that moment is, whatever happens.
Incredible. Well, Andrew, we've come to the end of our hour together. I want to, first of all, congratulate you on the superb work. It's absolutely remarkable. To say it's an intellectual adventure is an understatement. It truly is, I think, a gift from Cygnus that's going to open the gate inside so many hearts and minds. And I, of course, want to thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
I look forward to talking with Andrew Collins again in the near future. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. Next up, Linda Moulton Howe.
You're about to experience something you just can't get elsewhere. Emmy Award-winning science reporter Linda Moulton Howe reporting on the absolute leading edge of science, discovery, and the true mysteries of the unknown. Don't miss our website, earthfiles.com, the one science website that tells you the secrets the others dare not. earthfiles.com. This week, she's reporting on that extraordinary new UN report on global warming and just how fast climate is changing on planet Earth. Here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. That's right. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, known as the IPCC, has been working on its first report since 2001 that is supposed to be a consensus of scientists and computer labs around the world about where global climate change is headed. This report now says it is, and this is a quote, and it was argued about with the nation of China and others, but they are now saying it is, quote, very likely, unquote, that increasing carbon dioxide is caused by human activity. The report also acknowledges that there has been an increase in stronger storms in various parts of the world, and specifically storms in North and South America are linked now to global warming. How high does the IPCC now think the average global temperature will rise over the next 90 years? Between 2.5 to 10.4 degrees Fahrenheit. That is a lot more than the last 100 years. And how high will sea levels rise? For reasons that are not clear, the rapidly increasing ice melts of Antarctica and Greenland were left out of the initial draft of the IPCC's 2007 report, allegedly because computer models don't have current data to accurately assess the impact. So the report might project only a 5 to 23-inch rise in sea level. But scientists who have been studying glacier ice melt their entire careers are alarmed at recent increases in the rate of Greenland and Antarctic ice melt. This week I talked with Lonnie Thompson, Ph.D., Distinguished Professor of Geology at the School of Earth Sciences and Research Scientist in the Byrd Polar Research Center at Ohio State University in Columbus. He thinks there is a possibility that sea level rise could be 5 times higher than the IPCC report.
That's where I have the real problem. When you look at those numbers that the IPCC 2007 document give for increase in sea level, it's like 5 inches to something like 23 inches. And I think this is way understating what we know. So I have problems with that. I know a number of scientists around the world have complained about this being inadequate number based on what we know. And you cannot ignore Greenland and Antarctica, where we have most of the water stored in ice on land.
So does that mean that the UN has come under some political pressure to basically falsify data in what should be a scientific report?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, there was unfortunately, IPCC is a science document, but also a political document. It has to be signed off on by 154 countries, including the United States and oil-producing countries, and so it tends to be conservative from that perspective. But I think on top of this is that there is a lot of uncertainty about our knowledge of how these big ice sheets are actually going to respond to increased warming. But what we do know is over the periods where we have observations, and we have now satellite observations of these ice sheets, that changes due to the current climate are dramatic. There's quite likely to be some surprises as we go forward in an unfamiliar climatology.
What do you think is a fair estimate about what the sea level rise will be by 2100?
The thing that I have been surprised with, having spent my life, the last 30 years on some 51 different expeditions around the world, is just how fast ice can respond to climate change. And so I think we have really underestimated the rates at which ice can disappear on land. And when it disappears, of course, that's just water, frozen water that makes its way through the rivers and into the oceans of the world and leads to global sea level rise.
So if you were making an educated guess, what do you think a fair estimate of sea level rise will be in the next 90-some years?
I find it more reasonable to look at numbers like in the order of 30 to 40 inches of sea level rise. But we have to be prepared for more extreme changes because of the uncertainty and the surprises that we've seen in the last 5 years in how fast ice can actually disintegrate.
What do you personally think is the worst case for this century in terms of sea level rise?
Well, I think the worst case is up on the order of 55 inches, certainly a possibility.
Mm-hmm. And if it made it to 55 inches, how much of Florida would be gone?
Well, we would be looking at over a third of Florida disappearing.
And a third of Florida, and how much of the Gulf Coast?
This is exactly what we're working on, but it would be significant. All that infrastructure that has been built, I mean, in places like New York City, potential cost impacts of those types of sea level rise are tremendous.
And it would mean that New Orleans was not at all a place that would survive.
Exactly. This is why these projections are so important, because we're right now investing a lot of resources in rebuilding in New Orleans. The question is whether that's money well spent.
What year do you think, if we're heading for a 55-inch sea rise worst case, when would New Orleans, Florida, and the Gulf Coast know that it was no longer possible to have real estate along the current coast?
Well, I think they're already realizing in the really low areas, like in the Everglades, where you're right at sea level. The salt incursions that are coming, if you get an inch rise in sea level, you will displace the vegetation and animals a mile inland in those areas because you're right at sea level.
For every inch of sea level rise, you're going to have a mile of incursion of ocean water inland.
Yes. That affects the type of vegetation. When you look at those ecosystems, you go all the way from the salt-adapted type vegetation along the coast to the freshwater vegetation that you go further into the Everglades. Those boundaries will shift as sea level rises.
When you say it might, at worst case, be 55 inches by the end of this century, those 55 inches would then translate into 55 miles inland.
That's pretty much correct, yes. The actual how far inland it goes depends on the topography, the elevation that you're looking at, but the change could be tremendous.
And that's why a third of Florida's coastline could be gone.
Exactly.
Earth's CO2 levels have been like a yo-yo, going up and down for millennia. Scientists have learned that when CO2 levels fall, the Earth cools down, and there have been many mini ice ages. When CO2 levels rise, the Earth warms up, the ice melts, and sea levels rise. One scientist who recently studied geological evidence from the Pleistocene era reports that as CO2 levels increased toward 1,000 parts per million and higher, the climate was highly erratic and very stormy with huge cyclones. She is Isabel Montanez, professor of geology at the University of California in Davis. She and other researchers are concerned that since computer models indicate CO2 levels are now expected to double to around 800 parts per million over the next 90 years, will the whole planet be challenged by increasingly erratic weather? If so, how many coastline populations will have to move? And how much Earth life will be forced into extinction?
There are those who say if we burn through our fossil fuels more aggressively than or basically at the same rate of what we're doing now, then we're going to look at 1,000 parts per million or more. But this is all happening at a much faster time period than in the past. I mean, this is happening in decades, if not a century, century and a half. So the parallel to the future then is that if we see such unstable climate in the past, whenever CO2 goes up dramatically, should we expect that climate and life on Earth is going to respond just as erratically when this CO2 continues to go up, but at a much faster rate? And that's what the big uncertainty is, because we really don't know how to predict that. We don't know how to model and predict future change when it can be erratic.
What caused the CO2 to rise in that 40 million years that you studied?
Right. Well, it's a sort of $1 million question. The best guess, and we have actually still to investigate this far further, but there was naturally a increased amount of volcanic activity, quite a bit of it, in part because the continents were all colliding into one another. And so there was certainly a source for CO2 to go up. And that's probably a pretty good connection we see there. What's not clear is how it yo-yoed. Why does it come back down and then go back up and yo-yo? And it probably has a lot to do with, at the time we had a lot of tropical rainforests in the equatorial regions, really much larger than today's rainforest. And they probably did a good job of sweeping out a lot of this CO2 in the atmosphere, but clearly couldn't keep up with it. So that may be the reason why things were sort of yo-yoing until eventually CO2 took over and just got high and stayed high.
Now, if CO2 yo-yoed then, what was the worst case of erratic weather behavior?
Well, the first thing I would say from this study that might be a direct parallel is that it seems like that window of 1,000 parts per million is a window, what we might call a threshold, where ice may be stable below that level, but it seems, at least in our records, when we hit 1,000 parts per million, whether we're going up in CO2 or down, that seems to be the stability point for the ice sheets to come back or to melt. And, we have a lot of uncertainty on those values, there's no doubt, but it's not the first time that a study has come out and suggested that magic window of about 1,000, 1,200 parts per million. The other time period is when we actually developed our ice here on Earth in the last 34 million years, when we got Antarctica and then the northern hemisphere ice. So if that 1,000 parts per million window is real, then it's pretty scary because that's, like you said, we're sort of approaching that. Big change in CO2 can be associated with very unstable climate, meaning in terms of absolute numbers, we see temperature changes in the tropical oceans on the order of 4 to 7 degrees Celsius. In the past, on the shorter time scale, they too have seen changes of about 3 to 4 to 5 and maybe even a little higher degrees in the tropical oceans as well. And then that leads to a whole domino effect, when you start to change the ocean temperatures so much.
Lots of extinctions.
Yeah, ultimately it can, and no doubt about that. And we see it in our records with the plants. But if you change the temperatures of the ocean, you change its circulation. And when you change its circulation, you also change the way it interacts with the atmosphere. And it's ultimately that then changes weather, climate and weather. So things like much more extensive storminess, much more even increased temperatures in the air because the oceans are releasing their heat and even more sources of gas, of greenhouse gas. So it can be an accelerated warming even. When the circulation of the ocean changes, so do the climates, especially in areas like Northern Europe and Great Britain, Canada. They can really get cool quickly and kind of oscillate back to very cold and then very warm again. And sure, anything that lives in these regions that can't migrate at the rate to keep pace with this climate change, they have one other choice, and that is essentially extinction.
Mm-hmm. What is the worst case that comes out of your research in terms of how bad the wind could become, hurricanes could become, water in terms of torrential rains? How bad could it become just in this next 90 years?
One of the things that we see is that when we get into these periods of 1,000 parts per million of CO2, the monsoonal type climate intensifies dramatically. And that's because at this time there was a huge monsoonal system, very much like those in Southeast Asia now, but much bigger scale. But what it really that means is storminess. And no doubt when we hit that threshold where we start to lose some of the ice caps, it changes atmospheric circulation enough. It makes the exposed continents now much more capable of warming the atmosphere, and you get increased storminess. No question about that. The 382 parts per million that we have now is higher than we have seen in the last, already it's higher than we have seen probably in the last 20 million years.
Mm-hmm.
For certain in the last 600,000 years. So already we are outside of the norm of basically stability for this planet. And with that increase beyond the norm, we've seen already a little warming, a half a degree Celsius. But we also know that those levels are going up. And there's nothing we can do to stop them, I think, at this point from going to at least 500. If we don't do major changes to the way we use energy and operate, we'll probably go to these doubling, the 800, 900, maybe 1,000 or more.
Mm-hmm.
And we fully expect that with that increase in CO2, there's a parallel increase in warming. So much more than the half a degree we've already seen. And with this warming, then, is the ice issue, the instability of the ice.
And if you were, based on everything that you know so far, going to make an educated visual picture for the current population about what the planet will be looking like in another 90 years, what would you think?
Yeah, I think about that a lot, actually. I have two kids, but also, academically, but also as a human, societally. I think that going to a seasonally ice-free Arctic is very reasonable. I think that's going to happen. I don't think we're going to escape that. Inevitably, that will impact ocean circulation. And that means that much of northern Europe and Great Britain is not going to live the way they are living now. They won't be able to. They will have very erratic, very stormy weather. That population will need to survive somewhere else, likely migration to more southern locales. And areas like the equatorial regions, the tropics, subtropics of places, developing countries like Africa, they will probably see much more drought. So they, too, will need to find alternative locations to grow their products and to live, as well as like the Middle East. And I think we'll see places like India and Bangladesh, low-lying areas that will be seeing increased storminess that will also need to deal with the increased flooding and disasters of these mega monsoons. So the bottom line to me is, where are we going to put as many people as we have already, plus the increase, in that much less inhabitable land on Earth? And then there's issues like disease. A lot of these migrating species that we've talked about going extinct, those who do migrate are usually insects because they can.
Mm-hmm.
And that means disease-bearing insects like the malaria. I think it could potentially be economically devastating.
What do you think is going to happen to the United States and Canadian climate?
The United States they're strongly impacted in that the mid-latitude northern hemispheres are going to see major changes, but it changes by region. So, for instance, for us here in California, we worry very much about water resources, as does the whole Southwest, because we, here in California in particular, we're so dependent on snowpack and that seasonal rain, and because we move water around so much, so we impact a lot of people, we'll see more drought probably, as will much of the Southwest. I think for the mid-continent where we grow, the breadbasket, they too worry because they are predicted to have much lower soil moisture, more drought, certainly earlier growing seasons and later frosts, but that in itself can have a bad impact. The East Coast might actually become much more wet and much stormier, but warmer, milder summers. Milder winters, which isn't always a good thing. And then clearly for the Gulf of Mexico region and southern Atlantic part of the U.S., that's an issue because of hurricanes. Hurricane season will be far longer lived and probably much more intense. When we do have hurricanes, that idea that they could be class 5 with these 200-mile-per-hour winds, that's very feasible, and they could be much more frequent.
More Katrinas.
Oh, more Katrinas. Certainly the modeling predicts that there should be more Katrinas.
What is the worst case for the next 9 decades?
Definitely sea surface temperatures in the tropics can change. And that's important in that we didn't think that was the case. We thought the tropics were pretty buffered, that was the part of the Earth that was stable. And it's not so stable. It can get warmer by more than we thought. That's not good because when that happens, a whole lot of other things happen in response. And hurricanes happen more often, things like that. Circulation of the ocean changes. The other thing is that we looked at the vegetation in the tropics, and there were remarkably large migrations of rainforest-type plants, the ones that would normally live in our tropical regions today. They like it wet and they like it warm. They migrated, in this case, very far distances. We don't know how much, but minimally tens and not hundreds of kilometers. And in their place, when global warming came on and when the ice started to disappear and CO2 went up, in their place came the opportunists, the dry land plants, the ones then that were conifers and sort of pines, ancient pines, but today are things like shrubland and weeds. These guys are opportunists. They can live in very severe climates, but we don't live off of them, and they don't do the beneficial things that the rainforests do.
And Whitley, she made a point about the fact that the rainforests are now one of the sinks, that which absorbs the carbon dioxide. And what we're coming up against in the next 9 decades, as impossible as it may seem, is that the tropical rainforest, with a change in temperature of the oceans, could decline and maybe die. And that would take yet another absorber of carbon dioxide out of the Earth's ecosystem.
Linda, it's very scary stuff. Let's keep praying and keep hoping that somehow we can avert this terrible catastrophe that seems to be coming down on us like an avalanche. Next week on Dreamland, Barbara Hand-Clow, the author,
led him to the secrets of these cosmic particles and their influence on human evolution. All around the world, he found ancient peoples fixed the location of heaven, the source of cosmic life and death, in the same segment of sky, the constellation of Cygnus, the swan. Cygnus was once seen as the entrance and exit to the sky world, making it a candidate for the original location of heaven, the God star, which before the rise of Christianity was often seen as existing in the extreme north and accessed via the pole star. As Andrew unraveled the earliest beliefs of most distant ancestors, he discovered they knew what cutting-edge astrophysics is now telling us. Those blue-white flashes may in fact be an exotic subatomic particle spit from Cygnus the swan that scientists call a cygnet. Some believe these are the same as the God particle, the unseen force behind the building blocks of nature sought by scientists at the particle accelerator at CERN near Geneva. As we have talked many times, the Mayans described a cosmic sap coming out of the Great Rift in the Milky Way in 2012. When I consulted Google on this sap, I found that SAP, S-A-P, may be an acronym for subatomic particle. Are we on the verge of discovering the deepest secrets of the universe that will ultimately transform us into higher beings? Here to talk about the impact of cosmic ray showers from the Great Swan in ancient times and those occurring in our time is Andrew Collins. Andrew, welcome to Dreamland.
Hi, William. How are you?
Tremendous. This is such exciting stuff. I've been a big fan of yours since From the Ashes of Angels and the Gods of Eden, but I think now this is probably your most important work, and it points to this idea that we're truly waking up into an incredible cosmic reality. Tell us about cosmic rays and how they might have influenced human evolution.
Well, Carl Sagan said as early as 1972 that human evolution was influenced by subatomic particles, cosmic rays, inbound from what he described as a neutron star. Now, that's a collapsed star, very similar to a black hole in deep space. And he said this in a book called The Dragons of Eden and in The Cosmic Connection. And this seemed to have passed by the scientists of the time, even though obviously he must have had very good reasons for saying this. And my own journey, which, as you say, has taken up to 30 years to recent releases only within the past few months, that there is a huge excess of cosmic rays coming towards the Earth from that direction. And what's so important is that when they looked at Cygnus X-1, the source, they found that it was spewing out these huge, long particle beams of energy directed at the Earth itself. It was like some unimaginable cosmic gun barrel pointing its way towards the Earth. And that is unique because Cygnus X-1 is actually inside our own galaxy. In astronomical terms, it's extremely close. It's around 30,000 light years away, which obviously sounds a long way away, but it's actually quite close. So is it possible that Cygnus X-1 is in some way affecting human evolution down on the Earth? My researches have shown that all the way around the world there are prehistoric and sacred sites that seem to be orientated or designed to reflect the influence of the star Cygnus quite particularly. And when I say all around the world, we're talking about everywhere from the pyramids at Giza to various Native American mounds in Ohio and Georgia and other places, through to temples in India, Hindu temples in India, to Avebury in southeast England, to Newgrange Passage Grave in Ireland, to the very oldest stone temple that's just been discovered in southeast Turkey at a place called Göbekli Tepe, which I visited in 2004. All of these places are aligned towards Cygnus the Swan, and it is also found depicted in bird form in the walls of some of the earliest Paleolithic caves in southeast France. Now, all of this is coming to light now, and something big is happening, and as we go on, I'll also try and explain how this is so important to 2012.
Excellent. But let's take a moment to just go back to the beginning of this. And how was it, Andrew, that Paleolithic man came upon this knowledge? Did he imbibe in sacred substances, as so many traditions infer? What was the spark that started humankind looking towards Cygnus, the great swan, as this source of tremendous cosmic energy?
New discovery about Cygnus, the constellation Cygnus, and it relates directly to our own spiritual quests and the level of vibration or of spiritual energy that we can achieve. There is, in William, I think Henry does a beautiful job of interviewing. It's one of the most exciting interviews I've ever heard. Plus, Andrew is talking to me in the subscriber section, and in addition, there is a Dreamland special event. It's the 5th item in the list on this media player. You can listen to it free. It is my own Cygnus meditation, and it relates to experiences I've been having most of my life, out-of-the-body experiences, and some work of Robert Monroe. Don't miss it. And also, if you want to become a subscriber to Unknown Country, now is the time, because we have 6 copies of the Cygnus Mystery available to the first 6 people who order a 1-year or longer subscription of any kind by clicking on the subscribe tab on unknowncountry.com. So now's the time. Let me turn this over now to one of the most incredible Dreamland interviews you will ever have heard, William Henry and Andrew Collins on the Cygnus Mystery.
From Nashville, this is William Henry filling in for Whitley Strieber. This is Dreamland. Welcome, everyone. I'd like you to stop what you're doing for a moment. If you're driving, pull over. Close the curtain on everyday reality and open a passage to the cave of treasure deep inside your mind. Take a deep breath and look around you. Look towards the north on the wall. You see a pillar topped by a swan, a bird of light shining upon you. Climb aboard its back and take another deep breath. And notice that the walls begin to buzz, to flux and move liquid-like. Suddenly, from the celestial swan, you see a blue-white flash of light. Then another, and another. What are they? The Holy Goose, the Holy Goose, the Holy Ghost. The Holy Spirit is dropping new life into your being, baptizing you in a shower of cosmic particles that transform your being. You emerge from the cave renewed, exhilarated, with your cells regenerated, a living manifestation of light itself. Today's guest, Andrew Collins, has been on an incredible 30-year quest that is legendary.
I think that it was probably begun when they would spend extremely long periods of time deep underground, communing with, let's assume, the universe, with Mother Earth or whatever. And for this, there would have been a huge sensory deprivation, obviously intense long periods of darkness. This in itself would be enough to induce trances. But if you then enhance this with the use of psychotropic, hallucinogenic substances, of which we know and are pretty certain that Paleolithic man was using, then it allows a sense of communion with that which is beyond earthly understanding, cosmic consciousness, if you like. And this in itself would have at least opened them up to whatever might have been going on deep underground on a very, very subtle level. But it is a fact that you can actually witness for yourself cosmic rays. And this was first determined by the Apollo astronauts in the 1960s, when they found that as they tried to go off to sleep, they would see flashes of white or bluey-white light in front of their eyes. And this was when their eyes were either open or with their eyes closed. And subsequent research that was done by NASA, working with the Apollo astronauts that came after, showed quite conclusively that what was happening is that cosmic rays were passing through the eyes, the liquid part of the eye, and creating an effect known as Cherenkov radiation. And essentially this is an emission, a burst of what we would perceive as light. And this can seem as an objective experience, as the astronauts saw for themselves. Now, obviously here on Earth, we have light during the day, we have artificial light at night, and we are not aware of this. Plus, our own atmosphere blocks out 99% of cosmic rays that come through towards ground level. And so we're not really aware of this, but, to this point, has quite independently concluded that cosmic rays may well be an important factor in not just the evolution of humankind, but our connection with cosmic consciousness, our relationship with the universe as a whole. And I believe that this goes back probably tens of thousands of years to the very first cave artists of Western Europe and, of course, in other parts of the world, when they would seem to have spent great amounts of time deep underground in caves that were as much as a mile deep, communing with the cosmos and achieving great leaps in intelligence and intellect and understanding, and paving way for what we obviously know as the rise of civilization. And what's so interesting is that deep underground, in theory, no form of external radiation is able to penetrate, which is why these deep underground facilities are often constructed so deep down in mines or within tunnels, within mountains and whatever. And yet we do know that there are two types of cosmic rays that penetrate that deeply, one of which are neutrinos, and neutrinos pass through the Earth virtually without affecting anything, and that includes, us carbon-based life forms. But there is one other type of particle that was repeatedly registered when these particle facilities were first opened in the early 1980s, and they were coming with a rhythmic pulse of exactly 4.8 hours, and this easily was able to pin down where they were coming from, and that was either a neutron star or a black hole. They're not sure exactly what. Actually, in the Cygnus constellation, from a source called Cygnus X-1. And since that time, in the 1980s, particle physicists, astrophysicists have been tracking this particular stellar body and have found right the way through to